Okay, so as I was hinting earlier, so I've been involved with the BBCs more or less since it was first delivered, since I first got one, and indeed slightly before that in some respects in computing in general. And I've not thought too much about it, apart from 10 years ago and a few years ago in trying to resurrect bits and pieces and failing somewhat miserably. But then out of the blue, I received this email to my work address, which I now currently work for Qualcomm. And I think they would claim quite a high level of security at stopping people getting through. But this didn't even arrive in my spam box, which had it have done, I may never have seen it. But I was rather intrigued, to say the least. So you mentioned Android attack, and I immediately thought this must be spam, but obviously I replied with a question, and Dave then sent me a very, very long email explaining a lot of things, which was quite amazing. And he also attached this picture, which I saw before I read the email, and I thought, right, who do I recognize on here? And I thought, oh my God, it's been 30, if not 40 years ago. And I thought, I don't recognize anyone on there. What is this about? And so I read the email again, and you mentioned a T-shirt, and I had to take a double take. I couldn't quite believe it. But Dave obviously liked Android, or at least he got a T-shirt made. And my goodness, that was a great surprise, I have to say. And the email went on to say that captivated by the artwork, at least, of Android, and the game as well, I understand. A book was made, which again absolutely amazed me. I didn't think any of this existed at all, so I was really overjoyed to see all of this. And this book is there. I don't know if anybody's seen it, but it's full of interesting artwork from many different games. And so I thank David a lot for getting through to me and sharing this with me. It's been a great surprise. And even more of a surprise is what he sent me just yesterday. Which on the back of his, I suppose, like the game and indeed the artwork, he asked me if we could make a copy of Android and perhaps even a second version of it. And I explained to him that, well, I had some discs and I did have a second version of it, and I never sold it. But it was on my discs that I can't read. And so I then, with agreement from Dave, we shipped off 40 of my discs. I don't think he quite anticipated that, but to Daniel. I'm not sure if Daniel is on the line. I don't know, but I pity Daniel having to go through all those and download what he can. But one of those discs, I hope, somewhere on it has got this second version of Android. And I remember very little of it, to be honest, but I think there were things like the ability to go from one side of the screen to the other, perhaps some different screens, different screen colors, I'm not sure. But I would be so fascinated if we were able to resurrect that and indeed get the source code for this and indeed all the other games, because there's some interesting code there that I haven't seen for a very long time. And it also, worth pointing out, I haven't done this for a long time, so please ask any questions, but please don't be surprised if I've forgotten it all, because it was such a long time ago and I haven't had any source code to sort of flick through to remind myself of anything. So I in some respects feel like a beginner, and especially listening to some of your conversations, it's amazing what you guys have to do with the Beeb. I'm really touched that this is still going. It's quite shocking. So Dave then said, right, okay, would I mind going and sort of putting together a few slides that sort of describe, I suppose, the journey toward, around the BBC and sort of how I got there. And so I have no idea what level to set this at. I haven't met any of you guys, so if you all fall asleep, please shout or prod yourself and get me moving. Otherwise, we may be here forever. Anyway, let's go. So for me, technical things started back in the early 70s as a child. I'm not going to dwell too much on this, by the way, but there is a reason I brought this Lego in here, which you'll see in a minute. But I had a lot of technical Lego, and I guess I've always been sort of technically minded. And so Lego was a great passion of mine as a young child. And I dare say to some of you guys. This was certainly before computers were available. But it kind of got my mind thinking in a sort of logical way, which I think ultimately helped me. Now, it's worth pointing out that my father worked for Marconi, and he passed away 4 or 5 years ago. And as I was going through his slides, I discovered this slide in the middle. And I guess as an early, let's just see if I can get a screen pointer going on here. Okay, it's quite an old version of PowerPoint. He did his national service in Waterbeach, and as a young man, he worked at Marconi. And as I understood it, and this was only a story I got after his death, he was a project manager of a radar system at Marconi. And up to then, I knew he worked there, but he was more in the marketing department, and then went on to become a director. And he worked incredibly hard. And indeed, as a child, I saw very little of him. You know, he worked hard to earn money for us, to keep us. Most of my childhood, from a very early age, in fact, for most of my life, he worked very late at night, doing his thing, and I didn't get to find out a huge amount what he did, unfortunately. But this picture sort of really intrigued me because it had a couple of radars in it, and he probably knew later in life that I've sort of worked on radar type things, but nothing quite like this. And so he obviously had some idea about technology, because he started bringing home some of these things. And as a 11, 12-year-old boy, I had no idea what they were. And I think the digital electronics on the left, he certainly didn't know anything about. And he knew something about the transistors and sort of explained how they worked in a very rudimentary way. And I was sort of left to my own devices to sort of work it out. I didn't have a pinout or anything, but I did manage to connect a few of these together. I did have a soldering iron, so we'd solder these together and could make incredibly sensitive switches. You know, so sensitive you could touch a door handle, for example, and with 6 of these all connected, all balanced with resistors to get their switching points right, you can make a very, very sensitive detector. So that was sort of my first introduction to electronics, if you like, and it kind of, again, got me interested to some extent. But I still didn't know anything about what these chips did. And then one day, this book arrived, and this got me very interested, because it suddenly told me that, you know, with applying 5 volts and ground and a couple of inputs and outputs to these devices, you could do some simple things. These are obviously simple gates, and by the time you've gone through this TTL book, you realize there's a lot of things that actually you can do. There's counters in here, and adders and decoders, encoders, display drivers, and what have you. And before long, I had a few of these things. And I then discovered, probably through a magazine, I'm not sure how, but I discovered Watford Electronics. And occasionally we'd go into Watford, because we lived near Watford, and I would spend my pocket money on these chips. And it's worth noting that this, although it looks like a shop, it was just actually in a street, Cardiff Road, not far from Watford Football Ground. And this house here, as this was in 2008, I think they've changed the style of this now, but in 2008 you can clearly see this was where Watford Electronics was. And I used to go in there as a child, and I would buy 7/4 series logic, and you can see they were 11 pence each, and I would spend my money on these integrated circuits. So we had, I don't know, NAND gates, AND gates, NOR gates, counters, mini ALUs, 4-bit ALUs, things like that. And that all really intrigued me, and I played around with that for a while. Then I began to notice some of these computer ICs and thought, I wonder what they do. But they were somewhat more expensive, so I didn't actually buy any of those. Now, it's worth pointing out that at that time, I lived in Garston, near Watford, and I lived on Bucknell's Lane, and this area here was my sort of social area of influence, in the sense I would get on my bike and go and visit my friends in Bricket Wood. At the time, my primary school was here, and my parents pretty much gave me free rein to do whatever I liked. My father was always working, he was happy that I was happy, and so this all worked well. I knew these woods like the back of my hand, and I wouldn't be scared to walk through those woods late at night. In those days, nobody batted an eyelid, and I had a lot of friends in this area, and then come age 10, 11, I moved. My father put me in Parliament's school, the secondary school, and a few of my friends from the estate also joined that school. And at that time, I guess I was a relative middle grader. They had a seeding system in the school. I was probably middle of the road, and most of my friends were middle of the road or thereabouts, and everything was good. And now I don't know whether my father thought that perhaps the influence of some of the people nearby weren't good for me or what, I don't know. But we moved, and we moved from this area where I spent a lot of my childhood, all my working hours I'd spent pretty much being sociable. I was suddenly moved 4 miles away, and to Kings Langley. And Kings Langley is quite near Chipperfield, and we'll come back to that connection in a minute. But I was now left somewhat isolated from my original group of friends at school, and was somewhat bored. So then came my 13th birthday, and I asked my father for an oscilloscope, because I thought, well, it'd be good to understand what's going on. And they were about 300 quid, and I found one in a magazine, or at least I thought I did, for about 60 quid. I had a look for it in all the archives, which is one of the things that you can do nowadays, but I couldn't find one for 60 quid, but they were £300. Now, whether my father knew that was never going to be a good investment or not, I don't know. But anyway, suffice to say, on my birthday, rather than get an oscilloscope, I got one of these things, which was a RAM chip that I wanted. And I thought, okay, what am I going to do with this? It had a data sheet with it. And so I thought, I'll connect it to my Lego, see what we can create. And so, with 7/4 series logic, you can make an oscillator by jamming the output of an inverter gate, a Schmidt trigger inverter with the capacitor and resistor. And of course, I had no oscilloscope, so I didn't really know how fast this was going. But if you connect it up to a counter, and then perhaps another counter, and another counter, and then an LED, you can see how fast the LED is going and work backwards, work out roughly how fast it's going. And then if you have a number of these counter chips all counting away, that can be an address into the RAM. And then I picked up a keyboard from a jumble sale. So this is a picture I found on the internet, which is similar to how it looks. I think I had quite a few ICs on here, but suffice to say, we have a mechanism to address a RAM and codes that we could save, so we could program it and play back. And with my Lego, I built this little forklift truck that could go backwards and forwards, and the arm could go up and down. And this was all quite exciting at the time. And I think I got to the point where I could move the forklift truck forward, pick up something, move it forward, put it down, come back, and then bring it back again, and then record it and then play it back. And I thought this was all very interesting, but I suppose somewhat limiting, because I couldn't turn the Lego; it could only go forwards or backwards. That was quite interesting. But then I thought, okay, so what else can I do with this RAM? And by the way, if there's anyone's got any questions, please feel free to chip in. What else can I do with this RAM? I thought. So we had a black and white television, and I thought, wouldn't it be an idea if I could somehow get an image of that RAM on the television? And obviously, I didn't know much about televisions, but I had a book that sort of described roughly how it worked. And my father was quite insistent I wasn't going to be plugging anything into the back of this television, like a valve, black and white valve TV. It was very hot and 500 volts or whatever. So I wrapped a wire around the back of the aerial, hoping this was going to work, and devised a circuit that took the 4,000 bits. So these were arranged as 1K by 4 bits. And I thought, well, maybe if I put a decoder on the end, I can get 4,096 by 1 bit, and have, by repeating each line a few times, build up individual pixels. And I thought, given that I didn't have an oscilloscope and I didn't have any crystals, I thought, well, this is never going to work very well. And I didn't really understand it, to be honest, that well either. But nevertheless, I thought, well, let's give it a go. I think my dad thought I was bonkers. Nothing was ever going to work. And well, he wasn't far off the truth. I would sit there guessing at what this number should be, and then going through the tuner, trying to tune, and occasionally something would flicker past the screen really quickly. You'd never be able to see it. And I would tweak the tuning up and down, backwards and forwards, and tweak this up and down. Again, not really knowing, not having any of the proper sync signals, so I knew it wasn't ever going to work. But I believe, now whether this was true or not, that at some moment I saw a swirling pattern of black and white dots on the screen that clearly wasn't noise. And I ran to my father saying, I've got it working. Anyway, I came back and it had gone, and I never got it back again. And I gave up. But for me, the analog side of this, the difficulty in modulating this signal became a challenge. You know, in a way, the processing, I could understand that. It was all digital, but this had an additional appeal to me. And I thought, you know what, at some point, you know, this is something I will do, you know, make chips for a living. And, you know, that effectively has come to pass, you know. And so my hobby, which, you know, I did a lot at that age, I effectively still do. So, you know, I'm kind of very grateful for that. Then, roughly at the same time, my school bought a computer. And so whilst at home I was playing with my electronics, at school this computer arrived, and my first thought was, great, a computer. I should be able to ask it any question and it will just tell me the answer. What an amazing machine. And so a few people were kind of interested in this. It was put in a computer room. Of course, the teachers didn't know anything about it, so we were left to sort of work out how it worked. And, you know, I duly got it and asked it a question, and very, very quickly realised that it wasn't going to tell me any answer. It wasn't going to tell me any more than I already told it. So my initial thought was, well, what good's that? But then a few of us started playing around with it, and we started doing a few things that raised a few teachers' eyebrows. And they began to think, well, what are you doing? Where did you get that from? And they began to realise that actually we were creating things. You know, we had little 3D graphics that were rotating with some hidden line removal using, in fact, we were writing, I think, basic and some assembly code, and there were a few of us who were quite into this. And it turned out that this became an obsession, to the point we would get to school early, a few of us, and during school, every break, if we could miss any lessons, then we would. This was at a time when we were just before O-levels, actually, so we hadn't started our O-levels, so we had a little bit of spare time. But pretty much every moment of our day, we were glued to this thing. And then the Beeb came out, and we'd heard about it, I think, in the end of 81, and so sometime, I'm not exactly sure, the early 82, a few of us got together, or not got together, we independently got our hands on one. Either we, in my case, I spent all of my money because there's no way my father was going to buy one for Christmas, but I spent literally every single penny I had on one of these things. I kind of knew this is what we needed to do. You know, so yes, the rest of my teenage life was pretty much spent in this room. So remember, we'd moved house, I had no friends nearby. This, in a sense, was a substitute for my teenage years, but there we go, probably well spent, I hope. Anyway, with these other two friends of mine, so this is me as I was then in 1982. So I'm Paul, and this is Oliver and Malcolm, and together we made PaulH software. And we had sort of lashed together a few games at school, not particularly good ones, and now we had our own BBC micros. We thought, right, okay, let's see if we can sell some, you know, but let's see what we can do and see if we can, you know, perhaps make some money as a little, you know, sideline. Who knows? And so we copied a few of these games manually onto cassette and photocopied some labels. And I don't even have a copy of this game, but interestingly, when I was looking through some of the the games in the archive, I came across a game that was almost identical to this. I couldn't believe even the playing of it. It almost felt like I was playing the same game. It was quite incredible. But I'm hoping that somewhere on one of those discs, when Daniel gets round to it, maybe we'll discover where this went to. But it's somewhat lost at the moment. Anyway, we made 48 copies of these games, and we sold them in this shop in Watford called Computer Plus. And I discovered this advert for Computer Plus. The Computer Plus, I tried to find pictures of it online, couldn't find anything. And my only reference was this in a Bug magazine. There was only one or two adverts that this company had bothered to place. And when I first put it in, even when I first sent this to Dave, I'd seen the computer concepts and I just assumed, oh, well, it must have been after we'd got involved with computer concepts. But just today, as I was looking through it, I noticed that's in reference the original three of us, which I've never noticed. That was interesting. Anyway, we in that shop, we by chance met this guy called Charles Moore, and in late '82. And rather than writing games for ourselves and printing them, he said, "Look, I'll tell you what, I'll do that for you, and I'll pay you a royalty. How about it?" And we thought about it and thought, well, we're at school, we don't really have much time to do any of this stuff, so why not? And at that time, Charles was living in Chipperfield, which was only a mile up the road. Not that we had to see him that often, but it was kind of coincidental that we ended up, living relatively near him. And as you can see here, Charles did all right for himself. So in '84, he moved here, and I believe so very nice place. And Computer Concepts moved there, and they all, his guys that ended up working for him worked there. But we worked for him sort of in a freelance style, and I guess we were the first. I think the first few people to work for him. This was before 1984. This was before this. This was when it was in Chipperfield, and he essentially developed computer concepts from those early days. So a few months after our Watford Observer appearance, the Observer magazine got involved and did a little piece on us, which was unexpected. So I just recorded that. And these were some of the games that we put together, which I guess you're familiar with. Certainly Android Tech you'll be familiar with. Space Hawks, you may or may not be. So this was 1982 and 1983. I'd like to have gone through some of the source code to talk a bit more about it, but I've largely forgotten about it. But as I said earlier, one of the things that amazes me that some of you guys have obviously put together, I'd be intrigued to know if any of you are here today, but how you can just now click on a link and directly play these games on a PC, I find astonishing. I never imagined that this would be possible. And when a few years ago I couldn't get onto my discs, to know that these games, people had already put them online was very reassuring. I thought, well, at least some of this stuff has been captured. So very grateful for that. And then, so Dave mentioned that you guys have been playing this every few years, and I couldn't quite believe it. And unfortunately, just a few weeks ago, I missed Dave's email, unfortunately, but I can't believe that you were literally playing this game that I had sort of given up on years ago. So I find that quite astonishing. So thank you guys for your interest in all this. It's quite incredible. So I did a few other things after Androids. That was a game, and I think I sort of thought, well, what else is there? And I think Charles in Computer Concepts was keen to move out of games into more utilities and word processing packages and things like that, which is obviously something he did. And so he wanted to move more into the business side of things. And so he got us to think about other things that we could do. And Oliver, so this was a picture of him at university, I believe. And we got together to build Disk Doctor, which some of you may be familiar with. I think Oliver was certainly the wizard when it came to understanding the disk chip. It was one of his passions. I tried contacting Oliver, and well, as I am very poor on LinkedIn, I suspect he's the same. I did contact him about 10 years ago, and we had a chat, and we didn't quite meet up. So I haven't seen him since he was at university. And Malcolm, we haven't heard from at all. Anyway, so anyway, there's a number of things there, and I suppose there was some disassembly code and some memory zaps and things like that. To be honest, I can't really remember much about it. You guys probably will remember more about it than I do. But, that was something that we put together whilst at school. And the thing that pleased me in looking back at all of this, it never really dawned on me that my early childhood, if you like, was affected by the chips that I bought at Watford Electronics, and it never really crossed my mind. We sold all our games through Computer Plus. I worked with Computer Concepts, and I never went back to Watford Electronics, oddly. And so I was kind of pleased when I looked back through the archive to see that actually they were selling one of my chips. I thought that's quite cool. I say one of my chips, the software, one of the chips that they were selling. So I thought that was quite good. I never really thought that they would have done, but they did. And as time went on, we got a little bit more ambitious, and so I remember that Acorn were promising a graphics extension on, and at the time, for some reason it was late. At least that's what I recall. And in the interim, I think Charles may have said, you know, why don't you have a go, see what you can do? So so I did, but I can't remember much about it. So I do have a leaflet. So this leaflet I had and kept. I don't know if this was. I don't know if this has been copied before, but somewhere on one of those discs that I can't read must be all of the original source code that created all these things. So it would be quite interesting if we could get that back. I'd be interested to see that running again. But and I heard some guys talking about circle drawing algorithms before, and I remember at some point playing around with some of these pixel drawing circle algorithms, the Prism algorithm, I think so I mentioned, and I certainly played around with them. Whether they're in this, I don't know. But I also remember spending a long time trying to do a fast triangle fill routine to put in here, but it didn't quite make it. I don't think. Almost got it, but didn't quite arrive in time for this. But somewhere on one of those discs will be a fast triangle fill routine, which is a bit fiddly, but interesting at the time. Anyway, so I tried to contact Malcolm, but unfortunately, he passed away at the end of last year, and so I hadn't seen him since university. So that was a bit of a shock, to be honest. But I remember having some good times with Malcolm. But curiously, he in finding this picture here, it was attached to a link, and in the link was his memorial service. And it turned out that, and I didn't know any of this. In fact, I found out more about Malcolm through this memorial service than I ever knew, because he it just turned out, you know, he had a broken home and moved around in various places, and then obviously what I didn't know during his recent life is he had done a lot of work with children's charities around the world, and he travelled a lot and joined the church and became a musician and done a lot of things. And in his memorial service, POM Software got a brief mention, so that was quite touching. But anyway, sadly, Malcolm is not with us anymore, which is a great shame. But he helped me write Printmaster, and again, I remember very little of it, to be honest. But and he wrote some of the one or two of the games in Games Galore as well. Which so somehow I'd like to thank Malcolm, or at least I said a few words. But, anyway, so moving on. One of the other things that I hadn't realised looking back at the archive is how much computer concepts advertised. I was astonished. Every other page seemed to have computer concepts on it, and at the time I never had much time to read these magazines, and so this was all relatively new to me, to be honest. I mean, we worked for Charles, and he did all this stuff, and he and you give us royalty checks, and that was it. But in the middle of all of this was all this advertising, and it all was a little bit lost to me. And I do remember this occasion, somewhat funny in a way. There was a BBC Micro show that we went to, and again, looking through the archive, I was quite intrigued to see that the advert for Computer Concepts at the time was centered around the graphics ROM, obviously that had just come online. And I happened to notice that the next page was talking about Hermann Hauser. Not that I've got any connection to him, but I thought it was quite interesting. But he was very much on the scene, obviously, at the show and having something to say. But my overwhelming memory of this show was the fact that I was there demonstrating the graphics ROM, and people come up to me and be taking payments. Nobody had showed me how to use the swipe machine that you use for credit cards in those days. And so somehow I managed to get it wrong. And every single one that I sold, effectively, I was giving it away, and I had no idea. And the other thing I've discovered was a thing called Pigman, which I don't know if anyone knows, but somebody had managed to install it on one of the computers such that when you turned it on, Pigman came up, which was somewhat hilarious and embarrassing. Anyway, around 85, sort of finished school, started university, and I had a year off. And it was I had to choose a placement to go. Only I left it so late that there was literally only one place in the whole country that I could go for my placement. And it turned out to be Marconi Defence Systems in Stanmore, the very place where my father worked. And this was not by any kind of choice or design. It was Hobson's choice. That was it. That was where I was going. And so be it. And off I went. So straight from school. And my first placement, I got to play around with some pretty interesting stuff. Bragg cells are a curious thing. I won't bore you with the detail, but suffice to say, it allowed you to do some sort of spectrum analysis, look at spectra and move laser beams back and forwards, which was quite interesting. And at the time, I was inspired by this guy, Dave Hollis. And previously, he had previously my work had all been rather ad hoc. So everything I designed before was all very, how should we say, random. It wasn't designed. It was just put together, and if it didn't work, fiddle something until eventually it worked. And if you go around that loop long enough, things happen. But he taught me how to sort of think a lot more logically about designing things from the bottom up, and literally changed the way my mind worked, how to solve problems. So I'm rather grateful to Dave, and I have no idea where Dave is. I did try and look him up, but couldn't find him. This was me at college in 1989, playing with oscilloscopes and things like that in the lab at university, which was kind of fun for a while. And whilst I was at university, and I'd forgotten this, I thought I didn't do anything during university, but clearly I did, because this was 1988, and so during this period, I worked with another guy, and I'm not even sure if I ever met this other guy, but I discovered a letter that from Computer Concepts, because of course at that time I had no phone at university, there was no internet. The only way of contacting people was by letter, which nowadays seems like madness, but there were a number of letters that went backwards and forwards, and normally letters aren't there to sort of congratulate you on being good, but most of those letters were because they found a bug in Interbase, and this was a really big problem that I needed to sort out. And so I think I must have sorted it out, because eventually got a letter saying, can I send the final piece of code? And I've been trying to find who the other person was that worked on this. And in all the other letters, it had talked about Gavin, but it had never given me a surname, so I had no idea who it was. But in this particular letter, it mentioned Gavin Theobald. I thought, oh, okay, right, so now I have a name. So I looked him up. And indeed, he mentioned Computer Concept. In fact, his name came up twice with Computer Concept. So once in a bibliography about maths, and this guy had sort of gone on to do a lot about maths in terms of regular polyhedra. And if you're interested, go and have a look. But he's written whole books and papers on the ways of dissecting different shapes and converting them from one to another. Obviously, that was his specialist subject. But the other interesting link that came up associated him with Jeremy Rushton, which is a name I'm sure most people recognise. And there's another name, Philip Martin, that I don't recognise. Anyway, I'm not even sure if I ever met the guy. It was an interesting arrangement. I was at university. I sent him the sort of engine for the Interbase, which was essentially all the database functionality. And I believe he wrote all the language that sat on top of it, and probably wrote the language that connected Interbase to Intercalc and into Word and all the rest of it that ultimately went on. This was the last thing I did. After this, I kind of pulled out with BBC programming and working with Computer Concepts. This was the last thing I did. And part of the reason for that is that in 98 of the same year, I started work in their guided weapons division. It wasn't a choice, by the way. This was Marconi Defence Systems, so I wasn't really expecting to work in their guided weapons division, but that's how it came to pass. And ended up working on this radar system, which kind of tied me back to the work my father did and the sort of work that I do now, I suppose. And I was inspired by this guy, John Gibbon, and John essentially was the architect. He was also a contractor, so they brought this guy in, and he understood a lot about digital signals processing, and it turned out that we needed to build a fast Fourier transform, and we needed to do this for these radar signals to process them, essentially convert this radar image into a sort of visual image of what this missile system would be looking at. And it and initially, because I was pretty much from school, only done a year at university, didn't know anything about Fourier transforms, they got me copying circuit diagrams, which the reason I mention it is interesting because my mother worked at Marconi many years ago, and her job was copying blueprints. And so I thought that rather ironic that I'd been asked to come in and copy circuit diagrams. And I thought, well, I think I could probably do a bit better than that. So I suggested that maybe I should do some digital design, and initially the guy in charge didn't think much of it, but John could see that maybe I could do something. And in the corner of the room was a BBC Micro, and I thought, well, I can program the BBC Micro, and no one else could. It was just sat there doing nothing. And I said, well, why don't we have a go at seeing if we can sort of model this FFT on it? Maybe I can understand it. Anyway, so working with John Gibbon, he explained how it all worked, and sort of developed a model of this FFT. And then indeed this went on, and we modeled pretty much the whole of the system and how this thing was going to work. And then it turned out, came in one day after about a month or so in this placement of 3 months, and John Gibbon was there, and he was a contract to come to an end, and he'd gone. And all of a sudden, the guy at the top said, right, well, we've lost John and we've got your simulation code. And you say, you know, something about digital electronics. So can you go and put it all together for us and finish off John's work? And so that meant then using 7/4 series logic. And whilst I don't have a picture of the actual circuit board, this was very similar to the sort of thing that we came up with. It had a TMS 320 processor sort of controlling it all, but the actual FFT itself was built out of 7/4 series logic. We had a multiplier chip, I remember that, but all of the address lines and the address sequencing and the control logic had to be done in 7/4 series logic. We didn't have programmable gate arrays in those days. It was all fundamental stuff. And that was back in 1988. And I still have, amazingly, the mug that I was given. And I've never really considered it until I was asked to do these slides. And for many years, I thought this brimstone thing had been dead. And then a few years ago, I sort of heard about it. And indeed, doing the research for this, I discovered a book. Someone's written a book about it. And I'm not quite sure where the monkey came from, but it wasn't entirely clear whether these circuit boards are actually from the missile. It's not clear, but the book does go on to describe how it works, and it shows all the Fourier transform analysis and how it connects with the radar, which is all very interesting. But one thing I'd only really discovered today is that it turns out this was the eventual missile that was created. And if you look online, it will tell you the development started in '96. So it's not necessarily clear that what was developed here actually went on to make this. I don't actually know. But one thing that struck me was the similarity in the picture that you see in the mug and the actual final shape of the missile. It's uncannily the same. I don't know if there's any significance to that at all. I don't know, no idea. But anyway, it was great fun doing this. I was only there for 3 months, so I never actually saw it working. But there we go. It sort of connected the sort of digital world, the 7/4 series world, developing processors, but it also gave me a new way of thinking about digital signals processing, and that's something I've sort of carried on beyond the work that I've done with the BBC and indeed at Marconi. So a couple more slides. So in summary, this is essentially what happened to my teenage years. My life got converted to magnetic media, which is now with Daniel, and Daniel hopefully is going to recover some of this. And I noticed there's one here called FFT, so I'm kind of curious as to whether that's going to be this code from Marconi. But I also took some of the ideas of that FFT. That was written in BASIC, but I then wanted an FFT that worked in real time because I had an idea about doing some audio processing, but slow FFT wasn't going to cut it. So I set about doing a fast FFT, but FFTs require complex multiplications, which is not something the 6502 was particularly good at. So I do remember building a ROM, or maybe it was in RAM, and downloading a massive lookup table, and essentially doing 12 or 16-bit multipliers. I can't remember. I think they were 12-bit signed numbers. I'm not certain, but I remember having big lookup tables and combining a whole pile of adds to do this in real time. And so hopefully on one of these disks, essentially it's a sound to light program. So you play sound into the beep, and different objects would flash at different rates in time in the music and then time with the beats and things like that. So I'm hopeful that we might be able to recover that, and I should be very thrilled if we ever get that working. So I look forward to that. But anyway, I'm sure most of this is rubbish, and one or two of these discs have got hopefully some of the Android source code on. That would be interesting to see. But, I don't know, if it comes off, it comes off, but if not, well, we tried. And I thank Daniel and Dave indeed for sort of giving me this opportunity to have this walk through memory lane, which is essentially what it is. It's been quite amazing. So I've got 2 more slides that I'm going to show you. So I left Marconi in '93, having done a number of interesting projects, and maybe we can talk about some of those afterwards. But this then sort of began a sort of era which more or less summarizes what I've been doing for the rest, till now, really. And I joined this technology partnership. Essentially, was a consultancy company at the time, but when we joined, they more or less started doing GSM, so mobile phones. I originally joined to work on electric vehicles, but the day I joined, they said, "No, you're not doing that. You're going to be working on mobile phones." And so be it. I was then set the task of designing a modem for their first chipset, and which was interesting. The GSM specification for the whole system is thousands and thousands of pages, and most of it relates to the protocol stack and how it all has to work to such that all the phones interoperate. But when it comes to the design of the radio and the modem, you get one page of numbers, and essentially you get all the different types of packet that you can send down the left-hand side here, and across the right-hand side we've got different types of fading channels and different velocities that you're moving. And what you've got inside the channel inside here is all the probabilities of the packet getting through or not. And so that's all you're told. You're not told how you do it. All you know is that the radio and the modem together must achieve these numbers. And all you can say is someone else must have done this, because they wouldn't have got those numbers had they not. So that was the only thing you had to go on. And so this now represented another dimension to the challenge, if you like, of how you go about solving this kind of problem. And yeah, it was a very interesting problem. And all I learned from, I suppose John Gibbon and all the signal processing, and I suppose the work from university, and indeed ultimately trying to cram it all in an 8K ROM. This is something that I came back to a number of times and was pretty good at it in the end. But we had an 8K ROM in which to cram all this modem and audio system. And I just remember spending a long time with a guy called Jonathan Lucas in the early hours for many months, rewriting all this code, making it more and more optimized, doing ridiculous things like overlapping lookup tables to save the odd byte here and there so that we could cram it all in. And I have some very good memories of listening to a lot of Stone Roses very late at night, which happy times. And during that process, got to use MATLAB. And I don't know if any of you have used MATLAB, but it I think is one of the best languages. It's so powerful, and you can get to do so many things in just one or two lines. Every variable is it can be a matrix, a single value, multi-dimensional matrix. A times B will do all of the different combinations of all the multipliers you need to do to multiply the matrices A and B together and give you results very, very quickly. There's Fourier transforms, plotting, and all the rest of it. And it's a world that sort of takes maths and makes it very visible, and it allows you to simulate complicated systems. And essentially, that's what I did then, and in various forms over the years. Pretty much, although the theme may have changed from modems to processors and GPS and what have you, and I now work full-time in Bluetooth at Qualcomm, but it's all been about modem design or working with radios and doing the digital signals processing with it, and yeah, it's been very enjoyable. And that is all I have to say for the time being. I hope I didn't break up too much within that. But anyway, thanks for the opportunity of sharing that with you. Thank you.
What were the roles of the PaulH group when they started? What portions of the programs did each take responsibility for?
That's a good question. So so certainly with Disc Doctor, Oliver had a passion for interfacing to the chips. I think he described it as bashing the disk controller was a term he used, which meant nothing to me. But I guess it meant programming it in some way. Or maybe he meant bashing the heads of the disk against the disk. I don't know. But yeah, so in that case, he would be doing all the low-level stuff. And I think I did the sort of high-level, the memory zap routine, the disk assembler, the decoding of the command parts of it. So I remember doing those bits. With the print master, I'm a little bit more sketchy, but I guess we might have had a similar split. Maybe Malcolm did the low-level interfacing, and maybe I did the higher level stuff.
Thank you for that game, though. Wonderful game. And of course, this doctor, another wonderful product.
Oh, I'm glad you used it. I'm glad I'm speaking to people who sort of appreciate it. Obviously, most of my life, I work with people younger than me who've never even heard of the Beeb. So, you know, it's not a conversation I have very often, but occasionally I do come across people of my age and we talk about these things. And it's occasionally, you know, if they've used a Beeb, they've probably heard about this doctor, even if they haven't used it. But yeah, it seems to be fairly prolific, I guess. To be honest, I never really used it. You know, it's when you're developing stuff, I don't know, you're sort of focused on doing that rather than I don't play many games particularly. I had loads of games. A lot of the discs there were full of games, but I don't really remember playing them. Yeah. Although I played Chucky Egg a lot and Planetoid. There you go. I really enjoyed those two games in particular.
Yeah, well, I'm in Canada, so you can imagine how many Beebs I get to see here.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah, not many. Not many. Well, it's good that you're joining this. It's amazing.
Love it.
Worldwide. I'm even more astonished. Yeah, my jaw hasn't stopped hitting the ground. You guys are still playing with this stuff. It's amazing.
Hi, Paul. I'm one of those guys who makes BBC games now.
Oh, really? Okay,
Yeah. Actually,
amazing.
there's one of the guy who's talking later. He's very much into bashing the disc controller as well. So
Right, okay.
yeah, I have kind of a mirror and a similarity to you. I work for Imagination, so we're kind of on the GPU side, kind of bashing the Qualcomm.
Yeah.
But I live in Chipperfield and work in Kings Langley.
No way.
Yes, but I write my BBC games in Chipperfield.
That is incredible. I don't believe it. Right, so imagine, because that's, yes, because yes, so now you mention it. Yeah, that is one of the companies on there's a little science park, isn't it, near the station? Is that right?
Yeah.
If I recall, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, yes, I remember seeing a number of job adverts over the years, thinking, oh, Kings Langley, I could go and live there. Well, there you go. That's a small world, isn't it? Incredible. Yeah. Wow, yeah, well, yes, well, my mother still lives there, obviously, so I haven't seen her for a while, but yeah, so you live in Chipperfield. Whereabouts in Chipperfield?
I don't know what landmarks would still have been there when you were there, but if you come up from Kings Langley, it's the first proper road on the right. There's like a crossroads before you get to the actual crossroads. There was a garden centre.
Yeah.
We live opposite the back entrance to the garden centre, which they're about to knock down and build houses.
Oh, what a surprise, yes.
Yes, what a surprise.
Oh, well, that is incredibly small world. Well, so have you been involved in the BBC since it was first conceived? How?
Yeah, I didn't get anything published back in the day. A friend Gil, who wrote Repton 1 and 2 for the Spectrum, ported those.
Okay.
We got a game signed with Tynesoft, but he moved to university at one end of the country and I was at the other. Yeah. And obviously cooperative programming without the internet is not as productive. So.
No, yes, I know about that. Yeah. Oh, well, very good to meet you. That's very interesting.
And you, thanks for the talk.
Well, yes, I don't know. Wasn't really sure what level to aim it at, but hopefully it was okay.
That's great. Could have done with more assembler, maybe.
Well, if I had my discs, I would love to have gone through it. Maybe there's an opportunity for another one, maybe, when I get some of my code back. Yeah, it's a bit hard talking about that kind of stuff when I have no memory and very little information apart from what I can get, from magazine adverts and things. But there's an incredible amount of information out there. I had no idea. I really didn't.
Well, I'm glad you found us, or Dave found you, one way or the other.
Yeah, well, it's good to talk to you guys.
I'll let somebody else have a go now.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you were talking about Computer Plus in Watford.
Yes.
Yes, I remember them. bought a few things from them back when they were there.
Right. Okay.
But no, you're not going to find many pictures because that area got all redeveloped a few years back.
Yes.
When they redid the shopping centre.
That's right. Yes, I looked at it online, and there was very little there. And it did say the only reference I got to where the shop was opposite Truins. That's right, opposite Truins. They said, which was, as you say, knocked down and rebuilt. So yes, I'm sure it's not there anymore. But I didn't even manage to find a picture of the shop or anything in the shop.
No.
Very, very few references to the place. Yeah, it took me a long time to find it, and even remember the name of it. Yeah, I couldn't remember the name. But,
yeah, there was them. There was Watford Electronics, and there was another one right up the top end of the Watford High Street by the City Hall. And that was still there because it was a camera shop as well, and they're still going.
right. Okay.
So I don't know if
Wow.
you ever went to that one.
I probably did, but I don't remember, to be perfectly honest. Yeah. So, have you had much involvement with BBC since its early days?
I got one, probably 82, 83, somewhere around there. Used it for a good few years. Then sort of moved on to the Atari ST, then PCs. But got back into them in recent years.
Yeah.
Yeah, stupidly sold my original one.
I've still got mine. Not that I don't know if it works, but the disk drive doesn't work. That's for sure. So yeah, I wasn't able to load anything. But there we go. Hopefully they'll be resurrected at some point.
Hi, Paul. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Hello. Who am I talking?
Yeah, I was a guy going on about Doros circles and Bresnan line drawing before.
Right.
I had the Computer Concepts graphics toolbox, but I was saying to Dave the other day when he said you were coming on to speak about Disk Doctor. I mean, that was invaluable. I had that on every single one of my work machines. Made great use of the disassembler. And then I moved to London in '86 and started working on PCs. And I tried to write a version of MZAP and DZAP for that. So, yeah,
Oh.
they were great things. Sorry to hear about your friend saying as well that that's the reason preserving all this stuff's so important, you know, because unfortunately, people working on it was cutting edge stuff at the time, wasn't it? And
It was, and I think because I think a lot of it was done individually in a way that makes it more valuable. I mean, nowadays, you know, you have a game and 100 people work on it or whatever, and it's all very anonymous. And even all the stuff I do, I work, you know, with Bluetooth, but you know, there's no one thing that any one person does that makes a huge difference. You're all part of a massive collection of people from all over the world. In fact, you know, it's a real collaborative effort nowadays, these big developments. And so I think, yeah, the idea and the concept of individuals being innovative is quite hard to capture. Yeah.
I forget the name of the guys who give a talk at the Centre for Computing History, but he designed the BBC Micro motherboard, and he was saying it was like one of the last machines where one person could hold all the variables of the board in their own head. Just without wanting to teach grandma how to suck eggs kind of thing, are you anywhere near Cambridge by any chance?
Well, I live in Cambridge.
Oh right, oh cool. Because those discs, if they're starting to get bit rot or the magnetic oxide's doing, I'd take them to somewhere that's got a cryoflux system. Anyway, brilliant talk, Paul. Thanks for that.
Oh well, thank you for listening. Thank you. Yeah.
Paul, what was the difference between do you remember the Computer Concepts graphic extension one and the Acorn one? Was there any difference at all? Sorry, it's a bit, probably you won't remember, but...
Well, I did, you know, in putting together these slides, I did briefly have a look at the graphics extension one, just to see what it had in it, but not having played with it, I'm not that that familiar, but I noticed it had things like, I mean, you guys probably know, or some of the other guys probably know a lot more than me, but it, you know, it had sprites of some description. And I think from an earlier conversation today, we had these Bresenham circle drawing algorithms, and I can't remember if the graphics from actually did. I definitely remember playing with them, but whether it actually went in, I can't remember.
So who programmed that ROM? Well, you might not even remember that, but was that someone at Computer Concepts that programmed that graphics extension?
No, I programmed the graphics from.
You did? I beg your pardon. Right, okay.
Right.
I thought, sorry, I misread it. I thought you did all the programmed all the pictures for it in the adverts, but you actually programmed the ROM, right? Blimey.
Well, yeah, except I can't remember very much about it.
Yeah, that's quite impressive. Right.
It's I've sort of rusted,
So did you have did you have color palettes and dithering routines in that as well and stuff? Like, can you remember?
No, I don't remember that. And interestingly, the conversation that you guys were having before about that, I mean, I came in sort of halfway through, and it was kind of news to me that they were doing that. So I mean, was this trying to get different colors by reprogramming the color palette? No,
not really. It's just like dithering, really. Yeah, just dithering the 8 colors. But
okay.
Yeah, it's very impressive, even them doing that. You know.
Yeah, I don't remember. I can't remember. Probably not. But
I can remember the adverts. Definitely remember the Computer Concepts.
Well, yes,
from adverts. Yeah, they're quite striking, aren't they?
They are. Yeah, and I was quite surprised. I'd never really appreciated that every copy of Micro User I went in, or Acorn User, there would be a full-page color advert, you know, with these things in. So they certainly didn't skimp with advertising, and I really had no idea about that. So yeah, it was.
Yeah, they stand out, don't they? Quite, you know, when you look at them now.
They must have spent a lot of money on it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's quite a thing to write the a graphics extension one like that. Wow.
Well, yeah, thank you. As I say, I couldn't even tell you if there was. I suspect bits of it were assembly code. I definitely remember writing some bits like that, but whether, I don't know. I'd have to wait until I get the ROM back to see how complicated it actually was. I really can't remember. I know. I mean, looking at the brochure, I mean, it had all these patterns and text at different angles and things like that. So, but whether it was just doing it 1 pixel at a time relatively slowly, or whether I'd actually made an effort to do it quickly, I don't know.